But we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the Afghanistan papers. You know, this is just, again, it's more of the same. I don't really know what else to tell you. The country's getting worse. The government's corrupt. The system's rigged. The rules don't matter, right? I mean, it's more of the same. We've got these papers from the federal government. They were produced by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. They came out this weekend. And like I said at the top of the show, as far as I know, almost nobody in the media was even talking about this. You know, all I heard about this weekend was impeachment, and I heard about the shooting with the Saudis, which I'll try to cover tomorrow. It's another thing I've been meaning to talk about, but other things have been going on. But I haven't really heard so much about these Afghanistan papers, and I wonder why, because this to me is a pretty big deal. This is a report about it from The Guardian. It says, quote, hundreds of confidential interviews with key figures involved in prosecuting the 18-year U.S. war in Afghanistan have revealed that the U.S. public has been consistently misled about an unwinnable conflict. Transcripts of the interviews published by the Washington Post after a 3-year legal battle were collected for a lessons learned project by the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, a federal agency whose main task is eliminating corruption and inefficiency in the U.S. war effort. The 2,000 pages of documents reveal the bleak and unvarnished views of many insiders in a war that cost $1 trillion, and killed more than 2,300 U.S. servicemen and women, with more than 20,000 injured. Tens of thousands of Afghan civilians have also died in the conflict. The interviews were collected beginning in 2014, in addition to SIGAR, and SIGAR is Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR. It says, it says the interviews were collected beginning in 2014, in addition to SIGAR's regular audits to identify what could be learned from successive policy failures in Afghanistan. While many of the failures of the war in Afghanistan have been exposed by SIGAR's work, often in highly technical reports, the cache of interviews offers an easily accessible fly-on-the-wall account. In his own damning intervention, John Sopko, the head of SIGAR, told the paper the assessments contained in the project suggested that, quote, the American people have constantly been lied to. Two major claims in the documents are that U.S. officials manipulated statistics to suggest to the American public that the war was being won, and that successive administrations turned a blind eye to widespread corruption among Afghan officials, allowing the theft of U.S. aid with impunity. In one scathing assessment, Douglas Lute, a lieutenant general who served as the White House Afghan war czar during the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations, told interviewers in 2015, quote, we were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. Which, you know, at this point, to read that from a government document, it's sort of like, oh, really? That's so surprising. That's so shocking. You know, you probably didn't even need to read a lot of these government documents to get the same conclusion, to draw the same conclusion. You know, lieutenant generals, inspector generals, people that are generals in the war saying, we don't know what the hell we're doing. Oh, really? Wow, I'm glad we read these in the Afghan papers. It says, speaking frankly, like other interviewees, on the understanding that what he was saying at the time was confidential, he added, quote, what are we trying to do here? We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking. If the American people knew the magnitude of this dysfunction, 2,400 lives lost, he goes on. In another interview, Jeffrey Eggers, a retired Navy SEAL and White House staffer for Bush and Obama, said, quote, what do we get for this $1 trillion effort? Was it worth $1 trillion? I think the answer is a resounding no, wouldn't you say? And there was actually a really good Twitter thread about this by somebody named Richard Hanania. I don't know if he's friendly to us or not. Oh, he actually follows me. Epic. I just noticed that. He published a really good thread, which is on my timeline, sifting through a lot of these documents, exposing some of the worst of it, you know, because this is pretty general stuff in The Guardian. They're saying, we didn't know what we were doing. The people are being lied to. Yeah, well, I think we got the gist, right? I think everybody kind of came away watching what's been going on for the last 20 years. We've been fighting the war for 20 years. If that's not an indication that we don't know what we're doing, I don't think we really need to read it in a paper, right? But there's some pretty good examples of this in this Twitter thread. Like I said, it's Richard Hanania. He writes on Twitter, quote, Ambassador Douglas Lute says we spent $1 million per soldier to get them Burger King and bottled water. And I'll read you, this is directly from these Afghanistan papers. It says the Department of Defense's budget is roughly $120 billion per year, which should include about $1 million per year per soldier. That means approximately $100 billion per year on soldiers alone. Did we really need the Burger Kings, gyms, bottled water shipped over the Arabian Sea? Department of Defense's budget to build ANSF in 2010 to 2011 or 2011 to 2012 was the single largest item in the budget. It even exceeded the Joint Strike Fighter budget for 2 years. They were spending $10 billion each year that was appropriated at $12 billion, and they realized they couldn't spend it all and had to give back $1 billion. We can't just shovel 1 year money at this problem. You can't possibly build this facility that fast or this program this fast. So understand, $1 million per year per soldier. There's a lot of stuff in there that's kind of technical, but the statistic that is, to me, the takeaway is we've been at this war for 20 years. Every year we spend $1 million per soldier. So that means that every Afghan veteran, every Afghan soldier in the entire war effort at this point in time could have a net worth of $20 million if they just gave them the cash transfer. That is the magnitude of the money we're spending. I know we throw around these figures a lot. $1 trillion for the Afghan war, $6 trillion combined with the Iraq war and other conflicts in the Middle East. But I think this puts it in perspective, $1 million per year per soldier. So if we hadn't fought the war in Afghanistan, and by the way, this is just money for troops alone. This is 1/10 of the entire budget, the entire cost of the war. 1/10, as we could have given every single soldier $1 million per year. It says we were also pouring money into huge infrastructure projects to obligate money that was appropriated to show we could spend it. And we were building infrastructure in ways that Afghanistan could never sustain or even use in some cases. So basically the government's throwing all this money and they don't even know what to spend it on. So they just build up useless infrastructure. They spend it on useless projects, spend it on a bunch of garbage, simply to show that they are spending the money because they don't have anything to spend it on. This is one of the first documents. Another document, this is number 12 in the Twitter thread. This is a memo from Donald Rumsfeld. Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, dated September 8th, 2003. He says, quote, I have no visibility into who the bad guys are in Afghanistan or Iraq. I read all the intel from the community, and it sounds as though we know a great deal, but in fact, when you push at it, you find out we haven't got anything that is actionable. We are woefully deficient in human intelligence. This is 2 years, almost 3 years into the war. Donald Rumsfeld says we don't even know who the bad guys are. Here's another document. This is number 24 in the thread. It says the policy is that the U.S. keeps every single car, truck, and tank running 24/7 in Afghanistan. This is a memo. You've got somebody named Dr. Rondeau who says, as far as Congress is concerned, if the military asks for sustainment, it must get it. You are putting people's lives at risk. The question is, do you need to idle every single tank, car, truck 24/7 because of your concerns about security? The cost of that, and he's interrupted by Dr. Lutz, who says, do they actually do that? Dr. Rondeau says, yes. Dr. Lutz says the trucks are running everywhere. The other doctor says, yes. I mean, it is standard operating procedure on the basis to idle their trucks. For the quick getaway? Yeah. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So understand, for 20 years, every single car, truck, and tank in Afghanistan, I'm sure thousands of vehicles have been idling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 20 years. This is official Afghan policy. Here's another one. It says, warlords were paid to provide security so they would attack American soldiers and create a need to spend more on security. These are the same doctors. Dr. Rondeau says, right, we learned from our experience in Afghanistan, and this is where I think SOPCO became very alerted very quickly to the connection between sustainment costs, warfighting costs, and then reconstruction impacts, was around the host nation trucking contract that we had, which was, I think, 7 different contractors who were providing transportation and also security along the way to pay off warlords, essentially. Or they themselves were warlords who were in this game, this double game, or it actually paid sometimes periodically to destroy and target convoys because it escalates the cost for providing security. It's crazy. Bring another load in, it disappears in trucks, offload the fuel, it's a black market. So basically, they're saying that we are hiring warlords in Afghanistan to protect these convoys, to transport U.S. troops. And obviously, if we're paying them all this money, it does create a perverse incentive on their black market, where warlords who are tasked with protecting American troops are attacking American troops, so that it creates the need for more protection, so that we pay the people attacking us to protect us. This is the war in Afghanistan. This is the war which, by the way, we cannot end, which, by the way, we cannot bring the troops home because of, regional stability. I don't know, some kind of argument like this. This must persist after 20 years. Here's another document. I'm sorry, that's one I just read. Here's another one. It says, 6 months after he was appointed, Bush didn't know who his top general in Afghanistan was and didn't care. General McNeil had no guidance about what he should be doing in the country. Here's the document directly. It says, just before 3 p.m., Rumsfeld got a few minutes alone with the commander-in-chief. Rumsfeld asked Bush whether he wanted to arrange a meeting with Army General Tommy Franks, the head of the U.S. Central Command, and Army Lieutenant General Dan McNeil, who had been serving as commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan for the past 6 months. Bush was perplexed. He said, quote, "Who is General McNeil?" Rumsfeld wrote in the memo. I said, "He is the general in charge of Afghanistan." Bush replied, "Well, I don't want to meet with him." So the president didn't even know who the top general was. The top general, the commanding general of Afghanistan, didn't know his name. Here's another one. It says, members of the Afghan government stole $1 billion from Kabul's bank, which is the equivalent of 1/12 of the GDP the year before. It says, less than 2 months after Salehi's catch and release, an even bigger scandal arose to test the Obama administration's resolve. Kabul Bank, the country's biggest, nearly collapsed under the weight of $1 billion in fraudulent loans, an amount equal to 1/12 of the country's entire economic output the year before. The Afghan government engineered an emergency bailout to stem a run on the bank as angry crowds lined up to withdraw their savings. Investigators soon determined Kabul Bank had falsified its books to hide hundreds of millions of dollars in unsecured loans to politically connected business executives, including the president's brother, Mahmoud Karzai, and the family of Fahim Khan, the warlord then serving as the country's first vice president. An unnamed U.S. Treasury Department official said, quote, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 20 here. It had elements that you could put into a spy novel and the connections between people who own the Kabul Bank and those who run the country. And this is the last document, the last two documents. It says, investigators gathered data on corruption, put it on thumb drives, someone wiped the files, and then used them for movies. So this is directly from the Afghanistan papers. It says, I made sure to archive everything saved twice. We had 10 USB thumb drives. We got equipment. We could release classified info to other folks. But then we went through the second rotation change of people, and they didn't look back at what we had done. The 10 thumb drives were wiped clean and used for movies. And then it says in parentheses, entertainment. So they got rid of all, they filled up 10 USB thumb drives full of information they had archived about the corruption in Afghanistan, some of which we have talked about. And they find that when they rotated the officials tasked with overseeing this, they had wiped out the thumb drives. I guess they just didn't know what was on them and replaced them with movies for entertainment. And then lastly, here's another one. It says, I made sure, this is the same document here. It says, according to one audit, 40% of contract funds went to criminals, corruption, or the insurgency. So in other words, the people that we were fighting. So these are the Afghanistan documents. Maybe you can start to see why nobody was talking about this. Maybe you can start to see why. And this was released in the Washington Post. So it's kind of a big deal over the weekend. But I haven't really seen anything about this in any other major mainstream media outlet since they came out. And I think you know why. This is the kind of activity that is going on, by the way, in every single war that we are involved in. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. We're in West Africa. We are in Somalia. I mean, we are in just about every country in the Middle East. And this is the kind of conduct that has gone on for 20 years. And so it's worth remembering whenever we talk about, for example, I think we talked either on Monday or last week, I read a report about the threat posed by Iran. There was talk about, it was last week, about sending an additional 14,000 troops into the Middle East so we could posture against the threat posed by Iran. When they talk about possibly new wars in Iran, when they talk about how we must sustain a presence in northeastern Syria, which was in the news over the summer, when they talk about how we have to have some kind of peaceful or graceful exit from Afghanistan after our talks got canceled with the Taliban over the summer, these are the conflicts we're talking about. This is the kind of activity. You know, they make it out like, oh, it's the American boys in blue, the American military, and super sophisticated political analysis. I love this. You know, people like Dan Crenshaw, other people that served in the armed service or the foreign service committees in the Senate and the House, people in the DOD, people are in the military. A lot of neocons, in short, a lot of Zionist, in many cases Jewish neocons will tell us, well, you just don't understand. You see, the average person might say, we've been in Afghanistan for 20 years, it's time to come home. But something like Dan Crenshaw says, no, you just don't get it. You don't have the knowledge that somebody who served in the war has. You don't have the knowledge that somebody in the Department of Defense has. Somebody who serves in these committees in Congress has. These wars are necessary. We must remain in the Middle East to ensure stability or something. This is what they're talking about. They're talking about so much money that is being spent on these wars that the people tasked with spending the money literally don't even know what to do with it. And you could go through all the documents, 2,000 documents just like this, where they talk about billions of dollars in projects, billions of dollars in projects that don't even serve a practical objective. They just start doing things because they have to show Congress that they're spending the money so that they could keep getting more money for the war. You know, it's just like with this other document I just read about, we're paying people to protect us, and the people we're paying to protect us are attacking us so that we can pay them more to protect us. Do you see the insanity of what's going on here? And who do you think gets rich off of all this stuff? Of course, this is the bloated Department of Defense. It's the bloated State Department. It's all the people tasked with this in the Pentagon, this disgusting bureaucratic machine, this cadre in the military-industrial complex, and to some extent, you know, obviously the foreign lobbies that brought us to war in Afghanistan to begin with. This is what we're talking about when we talk about these foreign wars. There's really just no excuse. And that's why it's becoming increasingly frustrated that these things are still going on. You know, for a long time, I would say, okay, the president hasn't gotten us out of Syria yet. Well, give him time. Give him time. He can't remake the world order in one day. We're still in Afghanistan. There was actually a troop surge in Afghanistan after he got inaugurated. Well, you got to give him a little bit of time. You know, these things are tough. These things are difficult. It's a large bureaucratic machine. War in Iraq is still going on. You got to give him time. Well, it's been 3 years. And the problem is not only not getting better, it's getting worse. You know, we send out 1,000 troops from Syria into western Iraq, and immediately 300 more go in. We talk about bringing home troops from Afghanistan, or rather, bringing home troops from Iraq. We reduced the amount of troops by a few thousand in Iraq last year, and they go directly into Afghanistan. Then we double the amount of troops in Afghanistan. We talk about pulling some troops out of some areas, and then we send 1,000 more to Saudi Arabia to counter Iran. And when you see what's going on, you realize there's just no excuse. Arguments about foreign policy, realism, grand strategy, and I've said some of these things before. I do think there's some kind of a practical interest in the Middle East to have some kind of a presence. Maybe you have a military base, right? Or maybe you have an embassy, something like that. But this is out of control. $1 million per year per soldier, billions of dollars on projects that are useless. It's literally just throwing money in the garbage. And you got to ask yourself, when it comes down to this, there are reports that show that in some provinces in Afghanistan, provinces that are the size of U.S. counties, to give you an idea of how small they were, I saw a report that said America was pouring in $1 billion per day into a province in Afghanistan the size of a U.S. county. Do you know how big a county is? I don't know, what is that? You know, like 10 square miles, depending on where you are, depending on what state it is, what the population's like. You know, Cook County, not a huge landmass. That landmass, the equivalent of that in Afghanistan, they're pouring millions, billions of dollars a day in infrastructure projects every year. I look at this stuff and it's like you want to cry. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't care that much. I'm kind of an apathetic zoomer at this point. You know, it doesn't even really hurt anymore. It's just more of the same on some level, right? But you think about how much money has just been sent, is basically just been set on fire, thrown in the garbage, flushed down the drain, whatever you want to say about it. The money's just being wasted. But even worse than that is think about where the money could have been spent. Think about your life. $1 million per year per soldier. Think about how much money you spend on healthcare. Think about how much money you spend on rent. Think about, for crying out loud, how much you spend on taxes. Before we begin with your expenses, how much you spend on taxes every year. And this is what it's going to? Seriously? And, to me, at the end of the day, to sort of tie it in with some of the other issues we talk about, the only people that really care about this stuff at the end of the day are the taxpayers. I hate to bring it back to that, but on some level, when we talk about the diversification of our country, one of the unintended consequences, or maybe one of the intended consequences, I should say, is that the people that are coming into this country don't care about stuff like this. The people that are in this country don't care about the Afghanistan papers. They don't care that this money's being wasted. They don't care. They're not reading the Afghanistan papers. They're not reading these government documents because in many cases, they're not paying taxes. Or if they are, I don't think they're informed or probably not even bright enough to understand what's going on. Do you understand why politicians are bringing in hordes of foreigners? It's because hordes of foreigners don't say boo about what's happening in our society. They cannot hold the government accountable. They cannot hold the interests accountable. In this country, there is a history of people having a popular reaction against a government that goes out of control, or even in some cases, private industry people going out of control. You look at the progressive movement in America, which I'm not a fan of, in the 1910s and 1920s. That was a reaction by people and, to some extent, certain interests against abusive oligarchies and monopolies. You see in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a reaction against government corruption. That doesn't happen in a country of people that don't even speak the language. That doesn't happen in a country made up of people that don't even graduate high school. In some cases, aren't even literate, can't even read or speak the language. That's what we're talking about. So in some capacity, I look at this, and it is on a certain level about the military-industrial complex. It's about foreign wars and all that. I don't think any of that's really new. To me, I also think about the fact that the amount of people that actually care about things like this that would say, okay, time to vote for somebody who's actually going to change these things, that window is closing for a country that does that. That window is closing for a demographic or a constituency that even cares about these things. And I think I've talked about this a little bit before, but that is why they're bringing in these people. The people that are coming across the border, to sort of tie it into immigration, I think it's very related. The people coming across the border are people that are going to go to work, they're going to take their checks from the government, and they're not going to ask any questions, right? They're going to go to the public schools, they're going to be focused on, consumer culture or gang culture, whatever it is, whatever they're bringing over, and they're not going to be looking at these things. They're not going to be pulling the ticket Republican or Democrat based on policy, outcomes, anything like that. It's just yet another reason why this demographic change stuff is a disaster. But I know that's not directly related, but I do think it's worth tying in or reminding people. The only people that care about Afghanistan papers is us. You know what I mean by that? The only people that care about Afghanistan papers and pension schemes and the deficit and entitlement spending, anything like that, the only people that care about this stuff is us. Conservatives, we'll say, Republicans, we'll say it like that. We know that the Democrats do not care about things like this. But anyway, nice little tie in there to kind of mix it up a little bit. I know me telling you that the war in Afghanistan is a big waste and the government's incompetent and they're lying to you. That's not really news, so maybe that'll spice it up a little bit. But we're going to dive in. We're going to take a look at our super chats. We'll see what all you guys are saying about this stuff. I don't even know, at this point, I don't even know what's more outrageous. The fact that this is going on or the fact that we're not even surprised about it anymore. Not to go like dramatic mode on, not to go melodramatic mode on you. But seriously, at this point, what is more outrageous? That it is so bad? Or the fact that nobody's even really shocked or surprised? This comes out of the Washington Post. I feel like 50 years ago, this would be a bombshell. And people will be talking about this for weeks. Maybe we knew in some way, maybe on a certain level, we knew, of course, that the DOD is bloated and the Afghanistan war is a waste and that it has been fought incompetently and so on. But to have these documents produced where we have people at the highest levels I mean, they're literally saying, we have no idea what we're doing. We're wasting money. We're paying people that are actually our enemies. We don't know who our enemies are. We're paying, $1 million per soldier a day. To see something like that, I feel like a long time ago, people would have cared about that. It feels like nobody cares. And honestly, I think that's when you really are in trouble, is when people don't even care. Because you could have problems in a country. It's like Donald Trump said. You can make mistakes, right? You made a mistake. We can make mistakes. But that one was a beauty, he said about the Iraq War. We can have corruption, right? The government can fail. But the problem becomes when nobody even really cares anymore. Nobody's even really surprised anymore. We take a look at that and people go, oh, people are focused on impeachment? Seriously? But anyway,